Huawei. It's the Chinese tech giant that's taking over the world. Very soon, our government will decide if the company will be allowed to build our next generation mobile network, which will transform the way we live.
It's like going from Earth to Mars. It's not a faster world, it's a different world.
But Huawei is also a controversial company.
Look, we have met the enemy, and it is Huawei, and it is China. Make no doubt about that.
The fear is that they could take down our country.
We've got to be sure. We've got to be certain. Otherwise, in 10 years, 20 years, that could just come back and bite us really badly.
The US wants us to ban Huawei.
I see a threat from the Communist Party in China over the next decades, and that threat could be implemented through Huawei gear.
But Huawei says the US doesn't know what it's talking about.
We have a country here that virtually uses no Huawei equipment. It doesn't even know whether our 5G equipment is square or round.
So, tonight on Panorama, can we trust Huawei?
Whenever you're out and about, your mobile phone communicates with the rest of the world through these. Calls, messages and data are sent from masts like this to hundreds of phones within a few kilometers, and each of those phones send calls and data back again. It's a lot of work for one mast to do, and it kind of explains why if there are too many phones in any one area, things start to slow down. But it won't always be like this.
Our next mobile network will be the 5th generation, called 5G, and it will be very different to what's come before.
1G was about the analog phone, allowing us to make calls to one another. 2G allowed us to do things like send SMS text messages and do voice recording. 3G was about the promise of the smartphone, allowing us to access digital broadband services. And 4G, which is what we've had since 2009, allowed us to do all of those first three things, but just faster. 5G is like going from Earth to Mars. It's not a faster world, it's a different world. It's going to be a world that's going to be connected, in which machines will be talking to each other and talking to you.
And to achieve that, we're going to have lots and lots of antennae everywhere. On lampposts, buildings, you name it, is going to have an antenna on it. That's because there are billions and billions of new devices waiting to be connected that will communicate with each other, work with each other, and make our lives easier in ways we can't yet imagine.
TV off, lights off.
TV off, lights off.
It will allow you to control your energy consumption in your smart home. It will allow your fridge to decide when to order groceries for you and have them delivered by a self-driving truck. It will allow your dishwasher to decide when it needs to wash dishes, your laundry machine when it decides to wash clothes. So right now, we have to instruct our machines. But in a 5G world, our machines might decide to communicate directly to us or with each other. The machines will start communicating simply to regulate the flow of human activity. Your car is going to be connecting and thinking and interacting and communicating with every other sensor that happens as it's walking down the street. As it passes a building, as it passes somebody on a bicycle, information from a traffic light 3 blocks down that you can't even see yet. It's going to be completely seamless.
As 5G networks connect and run more of our infrastructure, the theory goes they will give a massive boost to the economy. The technology is ready to go, and if we delay the rollout, there are fears that we could fall behind other countries. So can we afford to wait?
The UK is currently one of the leading countries for 5G deployment in the world. That is attracting lots of good external investment, people trialling new applications and testing new services that utilize 5G in the UK, launching them here first. If all the operators had to slow down for 12 to 18 months, those investment opportunities would go elsewhere.
But whoever's chosen to supply all of this equipment is going to be everywhere. And the company that's way ahead of the rest with 5G technology is a Chinese firm called Huawei. They already provide equipment in our existing mobile networks.
They have fantastic R&D resources, and in most product areas across the mobile network, they are the number one or number two. We choose them because often they're the best product in the particular areas of the network that we want.
If you've heard of Huawei, it might be because of these.
I bring the Huawei P30 and the P30.
I'm in Paris to witness the mega launch of Huawei's latest phone. Over the last few years, the company has come from nowhere to become one of the biggest mobile phone brands. There are now more than 500 million Huawei phones in use around the world.
I first started to notice Huawei and its products, I'd say about 8 years ago, and if I'm honest, I thought they were run-of-the-mill at best, possibly even second rate. But over the years, that's changed, and in some areas, they are really now leading the field.
But it's not phones which are catching the attention of governments the world over. It's their position as the world's largest manufacturer of telecoms equipment. 9,500 kilometers east of Paris, France, and I'm in Paris, China. We've been given access to Huawei's brand new campus in Shenzhen, a huge site where employees take a train between office buildings, each of which is modelled on a different European city. Few journalists have visited this Disney World-like project, very much the brainchild of Rung Junfei, the company's founder and a huge classical architecture fan. He's been compared to the likes of Steve Jobs, and in 30 years, he's grown his company from a small workshop to a global tech giant, now employing 180,000 people. He's not modest about his success.
我这个人性格呢，又是一种比较激进的性格。
I am an ambitious man. If someone can focus on one thing, then they will definitely succeed. I was focused on communications technology. If I had focused on raising pigs, I might have become a pig expert. If I had focused on making tofu, I might have become the king of tofu. Unfortunately, I chose communications.
Huge spending on research means Huawei claim they're now around 18 months ahead of any other 5G manufacturer.
Many of our technologies are already far ahead of those by Western companies, not just in 5G or optical switching or our chipsets. The number of technologies in which we're leading is huge, and these are complex technologies.
But this is also a company facing some serious issues.
The biggest is that the US is coming for Huawei in a big way.
Look, we have met the enemy, and it is Huawei, and it is China. Make no doubt about that. You know, right now, Lou, Huawei, through access to unlimited capital from the Chinese government, the communist government, all of this technology, guess what? It's built in for cyber spying, for cyber espionage, because that's what the Chinese do.
This is Meng Wanzhou, the company's chief financial officer, being arrested in Vancouver in December. The US wants to extradite her to face trial on charges relating to Huawei's dealings with Iran. Her arrest caused a major upset in American-Chinese relations, mainly because she's also the daughter of Huawei's founder. The US also claims the company is guilty of stealing other companies' ideas and technology, saying it ran a scheme that paid its staff bonuses if they swiped confidential information from competitors, claims denied by Huawei.
Both sets of charges expose Huawei's brazen and persistent actions to exploit American companies and financial institutions and to threaten the free and fair global marketplace.
If found guilty, Madam Meng could face decades in jail.
I object to what the US has done. This kind of politically motivated act is not acceptable.
The problem is, Mr. Run was once a member of China's People's Liberation Army, and that's raised suspicions about his links to the Chinese state and whether it and Huawei may have each other's back. Shortly after Madam Meng was arrested in Canada, 2 Canadian citizens were detained in China on unspecified national security charges, and another had a previous sentence increased to the death penalty.
It's a Communist Party's company. It is evil. We shouldn't trust this.
What's interesting is that from the Chinese side, there is a view that Huawei is an iconic company. Madam Meng is a interesting figure in that company, and that she is the princess who is the hostage of Canada acting at the behest of the United States. So we've got parallel hostage narratives going on both sides.
America is convinced that Huawei is a pawn of the Chinese authorities. In 2017, China passed the National Intelligence Law, which says that if asked, all Chinese companies and citizens must help the government to assist national intelligence. China claims this is part of an effort to safeguard its security. But the fear is that if Huawei supplies any country's 5G network, the Chinese could exploit it for espionage. In the US, Congressman Mike Conaway helped push through a law that, in effect, prevents America's major telecoms networks from doing business with Huawei.
I see a threat from the Communist Party in China over the next decades, and that threat could be implemented through Huawei gear and equipment and networks. And of course, we're going to protect ourselves from things that the Chinese government, the Communist Chinese, would want to do to take advantage of America.
But is there actually any evidence out there to suggest there's anything wrong with Huawei's products at the moment?
The evidence would be Xi Jinping's own vision for China over the next decades, and the influence he has on those companies cannot be discounted. Anybody who does is fooling themselves.
Ryan Ding is one of Huawei's most senior executives. He's dismissive of the US's accusations.
The customers and countries that have used Huawei's equipment find Huawei to be a trustworthy company. In contrast, we have a country here that virtually uses no Huawei equipment. It doesn't even know whether our 5G equipment is square or round, and yet it has been incessantly expressing security concerns over Huawei. I don't want to speculate on whether they have other purposes with this kind of talk. I would rather focus the limited time that I have on making better products.
The Americans, along with Britain, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, routinely share secret intelligence with each other. Now, the US is putting pressure on its allies to ban Huawei. Australia has complied, and now America has warned the UK there'll be consequences if we don't.
I think there could be a real concern about the ability to fully share information because of the fear that the network that would undergird 5G in the UK, that there might be a vulnerability.
If a country decides to put themselves at risk that way, we can't put ourselves at risk that way, and it will then begin to limit what we can do with them and how we share things. We can always share things old school ways by paper back and forth, but in terms of being able to electronically communicate across a Huawei gear or Huawei networks would be risky at best.
This, then, is the choice that America is asking our politicians to make. Either we ban Huawei or we compromise intelligence sharing.
It does feel a bit like a threat. I think it's all too easy to rush to a conclusion that we should just exclude any company from China, for example. But I think we should reach our own robust analysis based on the evidence of what level of a relationship is appropriate. We shouldn't just blindly follow the Americans.
To help the government decide whether Huawei should be in our 5G network, the British security services have a special unit devoted to looking at the potential risks they pose. It's overseen by Dr. Ian Levy. His job is to defend the UK against digital attacks. He rarely gives interviews.
Does Huawei pose more of a security risk than the other companies that supply the network infrastructure?
So I think what we're talking about is assume the Chinese state wants to attack the UK telecoms networks. Our job is to try and make them work just as hard regardless about whether we use Huawei kit or not.
Many people think the Chinese state would love to eavesdrop on us. So if we let Huawei into 5G, is that a real danger?
It's no more likely to have spying on communications in 5G than it is in 4G. And anything that's critical, whether it's government, business, even personal communications, should be encrypted. So, all of the communications with your bank from your smartphone, they're all encrypted because you don't want to trust the Wi-Fi and the telecoms network.
So if someone's listening on the line, they'll just get garbled.
They get gobbledygook, yep. And it's the same for critical stuff in business, in government, in control systems.
So, according to GCHQ, the threat of spying appears overstated. But there is another threat they take very seriously. In a future where our entire infrastructure, our economy and our lives are run by computers talking to each other over a 5G network, what would happen if someone shut that network down?
If you think about it, the future of warfare is not necessarily going to be using traditional armies in the way that we think of, like with the Second World War. The future of warfare is most likely going to be cyber. So without firing a shot, you could take a country out.
It's feared that the Chinese state could order Huawei to build secret ways into our 5G network, things called backdoors. These would leave the country vulnerable to a UK-wide cyber attack. And that could be catastrophic.
We have seen existing types of attacks where on websites, for example, they're flooded with so much data that they can't operate properly. When it comes to the 5G network, controlling so many different aspects of our lives, imagine a scenario where that network, the 5G network, could be potentially flooded with data such that it just fails to function. So, for example, train signals. They're not going to allow trains to run unless they can run safely, so train stations potentially closing.
Traffic lights, the communication systems that the transportation sector uses rely on passing real-time information from one place to another. If an attacker has the access to that information, then they could change that information really easily.
But as we get towards more autonomous vehicles, they will become dependent on 5G networks.
Self-driving cars rely on hundreds of sensors. So if you bombard the self-driving car with a lot of information, then what you might see is actually the safety feature to kick in.
And just not start, they'll become a hunk of metal. Power, gas, water, they are all going to become increasingly dependent on smart measuring devices, all of which, of course, will be connected via 5G.
Lights on! Lights on! Lights on!
If they start to get conflicting or confused results, again, they will probably play safe and shut down. Potentially, we're getting to a situation where if it happens widely enough, then imagine this happening to an individual power station. How many power stations do you need to go down for the grid to start being affected? Not very many, as it happens.
Cybersecurity is about trust. You need to trust the people that are building your most sensitive core networks. And if you have countries that are known to spy, you have to be really careful. Geopolitical considerations, unfortunately, have to weigh in to your telecommunications supply chain decisions.
So would Huawei deliberately expose its foreign customers to a Beijing-backed attack?
There's this repeated accusation that's made, the idea that if the Chinese government tells you to install a backdoor, your company would have to do it.
The Chinese government explicitly requires all Chinese companies to strictly follow local laws in every country they operate in. Secondly, the Chinese government has never and will never ask any Chinese enterprise to install backdoors. I can say with certainty that Huawei has never installed backdoors in its equipment in the past, and neither will we do such a thing in the future.
But the latest GCHQ-backed report published in March found that there are security holes in Huawei's equipment.
What was the overall result of your report into Huawei?
The security engineering at Huawei is unlike anything else. It's engineering like it's back in the year 2000. It's very, very shoddy and leads to cybersecurity issues that we then need to manage long term.
Do you have any evidence that the vulnerabilities that are in Huawei's products were put there deliberately?
We do specifically say in there that we don't believe the things we're reporting on are the evidence of Chinese state malfeasance.
So it's just bad engineering?
It's poor engineering.
The problem is, however these vulnerabilities get into a network, whether deliberately or because of bad engineering practices, they can still be used to attack it. Huawei don't deny that there is a problem with their security.
The board of directors passed a resolution and decided that the company was going to invest $2 billion to launch a transformation program that will enhance our software engineering capabilities. We hope to turn this challenge into an opportunity moving forward. I believe that if we can carry out this program as planned, Huawei will become the strongest player in the telecom industry in terms of security and reliability.
So this is the $2 billion is the transformation program that they've announced. As we say in the report, we've seen nothing to give us any confidence that that transformation program is going to do what they say it's going to do.
So what are they going to spend that $2 billion on?
They haven't told us yet.
Huawei have since told us they will release more detailed plans early in the summer. An incident we've uncovered in Pakistan further demonstrates the benefits of close oversight. In 2016, following a series of devastating terrorist bombings, the Pakistani authorities announced the Safe City project in Lahore. It would provide a vast surveillance network of CCTV cameras and other sensors, and a brand new communications system for the emergency services. Huawei's enterprise division was brought in to deliver the scheme. But after its kit was installed, the project's staff made a discovery. Tiny Wi-Fi transmitting cards were found to have been plugged into hundreds of the CCTV camera cabinets. Huawei confirmed it had installed the gear. Two people involved with the project, who've asked to remain anonymous, say the explanation given was that a Wi-Fi link could make it easier for engineers to troubleshoot problems when they stood close to the cabinets without having to open them up. The thing is, the cabinets could already be managed via the main network.
As soon as you give someone another method of remote connectivity, you give them a method to attack it. Put a Wi-Fi card in, you're potentially giving somebody some other form of remote access to it. You might say it's done for one purpose, but as soon as you do that, it's got the potential to be misused.
It's not unknown for equipment sellers to install extra gear to let them offer more services at a later date. But to avoid the potential for misuse, the Safe City Authority ordered the Wi-Fi cards be removed. According to Huawei, there had been a misunderstanding, but they said they couldn't comment further. Germany and the European Commission have said that they will not ban Huawei outright. The UK's security services have suggested that Huawei's kit can only be used safely if that use is restricted.
What bits of the network would you be happy for Huawei to be in, and why?
We may choose to do something interesting like geographic restrictions. So maybe there's no Huawei radio in Westminster. Those sorts of things are all options as we go forward. In the 4G space and in current broadband, we're happy with Huawei being in parts of our network that are kind of dumb. They don't really understand the context of the traffic. So they know it's somebody's broadband at home, they don't know it's yours. They know it's a mobile phone somewhere around here, but they don't know it's mine. And because the Huawei kit doesn't have the brain, the sensitive part of the network, it doesn't really know what data is interesting.
And even if China did want to attack our networks, there is a thought that just banning Huawei, one of many Chinese companies, wouldn't really help.
The majority of products are assembled in China from components made in China and made elsewhere. So the Western brands that assemble their products in China and put their logos on the box are incorporating components that are made in China and assembled there. So they're just as vulnerable to cyber malfeasance as a Huawei product would be, or as we presume a Huawei product to be.
The truth is, no system can ever be completely secure. And the more secure you make it, the more it costs and the less flexible it is. The choice is now in the hands of our politicians.
It's a massive decision. You know, if government and the country wants this delivered on a timely basis, then engaging with providers such as Huawei will be necessary. If we don't have any involvement from Huawei and others, then the rollout will be slower. Let's make a proper analysis of risk and then apply the same rules to everyone. But I think, you know, the fact that this country will significantly benefit from the rollout of 5G should also be taken into account.
This is about risk management. If you are in a situation where you have a company that's headquartered in a country that has the capability and has coercive laws to potentially force one of their companies to do something, no matter what the good intentions of that company are, then you've got to think to yourself, is that a risk I can really manage? And I think the conclusion that we've seen come out recently is that at the moment that's not.
What would be the consequences of not letting Huawei into the UK's 5G network?
If we're unable to use Huawei technology in 5G, we would first of all have to replace all of those Huawei 4G base stations with somebody else's 4G base station and then deploy 5G on top of that. That costs a lot of money, but it takes an awful lot of time.
Huawei is the flagship of a country that is on the rise. They're so proud of the company here, they even make songs about it. You don't need to spend a lot of time in China to see that the power is definitely shifting. Just a few decades ago, Shenzhen was a fishing village. Today, it's a megalopolis of around 13 million people and home to China's tech revolution. Within the last year, every single taxi and bus in this enormous city has gone electric. This just one result of China's ability to push things through. While the UK has been anguishing over HS2, thousands of miles of high-speed rail have been built, linking Shenzhen with other cities across the country. So it's clear the Chinese are making massive strides in high tech. But GCHQ says that until Huawei get their house in order, it'll be difficult to manage the risks posed by their new 5G products. So will our politicians decide that the benefits outweigh those risks? Will they trust Huawei?